Hello folks, welcome back to Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. I hope by now you know this is Arvind Swaminathan. No doubts, I hope. Well, today let's take this case of this movie, the Kashmir Files. I did see it, finally, and it did all sorts of odd things to me, something I've not felt with any other movie. First, it made me weep. Then it filled me with disgust, real disgust. And eventually, the sort of anger that would make me want to pick up a machine gun and go out and shoot people. Added to that, for about 3 or 4 nights, I don't think I had any sleep at all. Because this thing, not only what they showed, but also the narrative, and the result of that, what happened? I mean, I can understand what happened. Obviously, I'm not the same class as those refugees from Kashmir, but my family also had to leave Mandalay in Burma during World War II, with the Japanese hot on our heels. However, as I said, now I have never been able to go back to Mandalay or to have a look around, because for years I couldn't get a visa. Now this is something totally different, because it's something people being displaced and refugees in their own country. Now this is something most people don't seem to understand. One other point I want to make here: please let us not call them Kashmiri Pandits. Why? Because the Pandit or the Mattu or the Tikku or any other name can be either Hindu or Muslim. For the very simple reason, for instance, a Satish or an Ashok Pandit is a Hindu, but a Salim Pandit is a Muslim. Now to say that Pandits and only Pandits came out, it could be Hindus or Muslims. And these are obviously and normally, as we tend to see, Hindus. So let's call them Kashmiri Hindus, not Pandits. Let's get this straight. I mean, I've come across a Muhammad Ali Mattu, Muslim, and there are other Satish Mattus who are Hindus. Dar, for instance, could be Dar or Dhar with an H. Could be Hindu or Muslim. For instance, Bitta Karate, his actual name is Dar. And yet there are many Dhars who are Hindus. So let's remember, let's call them Kashmiri Hindus. It's much more appropriate. Now we come to the movie. First of all, you see all sorts of things. Like a person hiding in a rice bin is shot at, his blood and rice is fed, is forced down the throat of his wife. I mean, these are not things which human beings do. But even worse was something like a lady teacher who was lured back to her place, saying everything's all right, come back, collect your salary, and you can start teaching again tomorrow. When she went there, she was asked to go into a room and wait. There were 10 or 12 others waiting there. They abducted her, gang raped her for about a month, and then sawed her in half while she was still alive on a saw bench in a sawmill. Now, I doubt even Hitler would have done something like this. It doesn't, I mean, this is not just the bottom of the barrel, but clear through the bottom of the barrel, the depths of depravity to which they have sunk. I mean, the mind boggles. Can they get any lower than this? And then to line women and children up and shoot them, so that they fell into a pit dug for them. This is like the Taliban. Any difference? No. And why did it happen? And only Hindus. These people were wandering around with obvious orders from somewhere. Now, who gave those orders? Bitta Karate said in an interview later on that he received orders from somebody, bang, he shot somebody. There's no question asked by him, nothing. I mean, he had been totally indoctrinated and totally brainwashed. He gets an order, he does it. He doesn't ask questions, nothing. Now, when people are indoctrinated like this, and we see and hear about madrasas doing this with 3 and 4-year-old children, they start at that age. By the time they get to 20, 21, they're veterans at it. I mean, what does it, I mean, how do they get to this level of depravity? Human life means nothing to them? Where were they brought up? Where were they born? What were they doing all this life? And to say that nothing happened, no. There was no massacre, there was no this thing. People left of their own accord. This is like saying, well done, old boy. You put the fear of the devil into them, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. Which means the government of the day in Jammu and Kashmir was complicit in this whole act. And let's be quite clear, nothing like this could have happened without their collusion. Add to that collusion between the politician and the police. The police obviously never turned up when they were needed, just like Hindi movies. When you need them, they're never there. Or they're off on some wild goose chase in a different direction. If somebody is going here this way to do something evil, they're going the other way. Why? Why do they do this? Maybe they were ordered to do it. And then what puts the seal on all this, that it had to be collusion, was something else which they did, rather when something which they did not do. That is, register FIRs. If there is this terrorism going on, people are being killed, somebody comes and says, look, please investigate, and they don't even bother to investigate, therefore they don't even bother to register that FIR, so that the government can conveniently say, look, it never happened. Where's the FIR? You have no information on these things. Therefore, of course, it never happened. Now, I'll explain a bit more about this a little later on, the importance of that FIR. When something is inconvenient, the police are instructed, do not register an FIR, because then they can always say it never happened. In recent times, the then Chief Minister, Mr. Farooq Abdullah, keeps blaming who? The Governor, Mr. Jagmohan. Why? Has he forgotten something? The Governor had almost no powers, nor did the President of India. Why? You remember something called Article 370 and Article 35A? What most of us in India do not understand is the powers that those two articles gave the Jammu and Kashmir government, and it stripped the government of India of all powers of anything in Jammu and Kashmir. Because under these two articles, the only jurisdiction the government of India had was A, the army to ensure that the borders of Kashmir or Jammu and Kashmir were not violated and kept intact. Second, foreign policy. And the third one, information and broadcasting. They had no power whatsoever to do anything else without the Jammu and Kashmir State Assembly asking them to and inviting them to do something. Which means it was virtually a different country. This is what Sheikh Abdullah and Nehru had worked out, because Sheikh Abdullah believed that Jammu and Kashmir was his personal sultanate, with him as the Sultan. Obviously, he schooled Farooq Abdullah, his son, in the same mold. Both of them believed that the Hindus in Jammu and Kashmir were the government of India's fifth columnists, and they're trying to drive them all out. And I'll explain to you how they did it. If you look carefully at the events before, during and after, I mean not just at the time, but 10 years later, 14 years later, you'll begin to understand what the whole thing was all about. First, Farooq Abdullah, as Chief Minister, released 70 terrorists who were in prisons. Now, 70 is not a small number. These terrorists had been caught at the risk of life and limb by the Jammu and Kashmir police, the CRPF, and the Indian Army. Now, to release them is by saying that, look, they're innocent people, is about as ludicrous as you can get. He also helped them cross the border into Pakistan and POK. This was in July 1989. By August, they get retrained, come back into the valley, Kashmir Valley, weaponized, trained, retrained, spread into little small groups, maybe 6, 8, 10 in each group, maybe smaller groups, going into these Hindu areas. And their work started. The first one was September the 13th, maybe 1 or 2 in September, 2 or 3 in October, 2 or 3 in November, and 3, maybe 4 in December, the last one being December 27th, after which there was a lull. Farooq Abdullah, as Chief Minister, resigned on the 18th of January 1990. Jagmohan took charge on the 20th of January 1919, and the massacres began on the 18th and 19th nights, 18th and 19th January 1990, and they went on. Now, to blame Jagmohan, why? There is no such thing as governor's rule, as Farooq Abdullah claims. It is president's rule, if at all, with the governor being his local man. But because of Jammu and Kashmir and Article 370 and Article 35A, what could he do? Nothing. And what was the message being spread by these terrorists? To every Hindu, either convert, get out of the Kashmir Valley into the rest of India, any part, or be massacred. And this is something they carried out horribly. Those people who went through it will remember it, maybe for generations, and I doubt if they will ever forgive it. And can one expect to be forgiven? No. And one of these perpetrators, Bitta Karate, he claimed in an interview he has killed probably 20, maybe 30 Hindus, as if it happens every day. It's only a matter of fact thing. It's no big deal. Why? Orders came from somewhere above, he carried it out. And here's the irony of it all. People like Bitta Karate, whose last name, his real name is something like Dar, Yasin Malik, both fated by the government of India, the UPA government, between 2004 and 2014. In fact, Yasin Malik was part of a committee chaired by Hamid Ansari, who later became vice president for 2 terms, doing what? A committee recommending how to deal with terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, what kind of a joke was this? Again, played on Kashmiri Hindus. You invite the murderer or the massacre artist to find a way of dealing with terrorists. It took almost 30 years for Yasin Malik to be brought to book for the murder of 3 or 4 IAF personnel. Bitta Karate is probably still wandering around free. In fact, he was actually brought to court around 2006 or 7, and he was released by the UPA government because they had no papers on their files. I mean, a person who is admitted to killing so many Hindus, and yet the central government had no file on him? Is that believable? I find it very difficult to believe. I mean, these two are so high up on the JKLF list, right on top, commanders and things like this. These are the separatists in that one group. They are heroes. But the Kashmiri Hindus are languishing in refugee camps. Does this make sense? It doesn't to me. And it certainly doesn't to those Kashmiri Hindus. Now, unfortunately, Kashmiri Hindus, may I just say this, you've been very patient, you've had to wait a long time, but even today, you cannot return because conditions are still not there. Yes, the first step was abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. That was the first step. The second part of Farooq Abdullah's thing, having cleaned a lot of Kashmiri Hindus out, when he came back in 1995 or 96, he was re-elected, became Chief Minister again, and he brought in another act. The Kashmiri migrants, as he called these people who were driven out, migrants, Properties Registration Act, which means the government now registers the properties of all these people who are living in refugee camps, who can't reclaim it. Why? The police never registered FIRs. Therefore, they can't even get death certificates for their old folk. Without that, they cannot claim this property. As far as the law in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, those old folk are still alive, maybe living in the US, pursuing their business interests, or maybe some other part of India. They've forgotten this property, but they're still alive, you see. Now you begin to understand the value of that FIR and how things are manipulated. Achha, this was done in 1997. This act came into being. He went one step further. The Roshni Act in 2001. It was added to in 2004 and then again in 2007 with Ghulam Nabi Azad as the Chief Minister. What does that entail? The government of Jammu and Kashmir, under the Roshni Act, could now sell this property to anybody at whatever price the government desired. Now, this was supposed to raise 25,000 crores for a hydel project to provide electricity, which is a farce. Because when you give away such property for fees like registration fee like 100 rupees, do you expect to get that kind of money? No. And the hydel project was naturally scrapped. Now you understand, first the massacres, Kashmiri Hindus driven out, the Kashmiri Migrants Registration Act, and then the Roshni Act. First drive them out. They can't come back because what do they come back to? Their homes are gone. So, under these circumstances, what do the Kashmiri Hindus come back to? They don't have any property, they can't claim it because there is no FIR and therefore no death certificate. Incidentally, there are people in Delhi who've been running around for 32 years from pillar to post trying to get a death certificate for their old folk who may have been killed or were killed in these massacres. Why? There is no FIR. Now you understand the importance of that one little piece of paper, the FIR. So you see, the sequence of events: first you drive them out, then you make sure they can't come back. So what do they come back to? So first step in helping them to come back, Article 370 was abrogated. So was 35A. Next, the Government of India has to first abrogate or repeal the Kashmiri Migrants Registration Act and Roshni Act, and nullify all action taken under these two acts, all registrations and all sales and their consequent registrations. Only then can they come back to something. Plus, there has to be an atmosphere in Jammu and Kashmir where they are welcome back. But they're still going to have a difficult time explaining how do the next of kin get these properties registered in their names. Now, a lot of these properties have probably been destroyed. I know a lot of 60 or 70 temples were destroyed in that time. Some of them have had mosques built on them, on those sites. But what do? You know what most of these Maulvis say? Once a mosque comes up, it is always a mosque. Not so with temples. A temple, once it's come up, it needn't always be a temple. You take it down, that's it. But a mosque will remain a mosque. So, how do we get around this? This is a classic example of collusion between terrorists, the state government, and the police, targeting one particular group. Why? Because it is a very much highly densely populated Muslim area as opposed to the number of Hindus. They could do it, they tried it. I hope they won't get away with it. But these are some of the steps which need to be taken before these Kashmiri Hindus can return. And of course, the Kashmir government and people like Farooq Abdullah have made it very difficult. Now please remember, it's not just Jammu and Kashmir. Now you see the effect of this in other places. Whether it was the Kisan Andolan, whether it was Shaheen Bagh and the riots which followed, whether it's what's happening in West Bengal or what's happened in Karoli or what's happening in Karnataka. You will find every one of these with the same sentiment behind it. You will find Muslim groups both in Delhi, West Bengal, Karoli, and the news media have shown with evidence that who were these people, and all these were pre-planned, just like this one in Jammu and Kashmir. It didn't happen overnight, it didn't happen spontaneously. And why does it happen? Because they have political patronage, and the police have been ordered by the politicians not to touch them. Now, with these two in place, they run riot. Until and unless you get somebody like the UP Chief Minister, who comes down with a heavy hand on anything like this. People understand, don't do it means don't do it. If you do, there is a price to be paid. You won't like the price. You see, people, especially mob mentality, only understand one thing: a great big thick stick being waved over them, knowing that if they go on the wrong side, that stick will come down heavily from a horrible great height. Like it or not, it has to be done. And until state and central governments do not come down heavily on such people, it will continue. And this country will find it very difficult to develop. Foreigners will find it very difficult to come here and invest. You never know when something like this will happen again. As I said earlier in one of the other videos, most of these thugs, or what you call them, mafias, have been kept there by politicians. And as long as they have political patronage, there's no controlling them. Until you get somebody strong enough to say, look, enough's enough. You stay within the law, you're all right. You step slightly outside, and you'll know what a horrible great thick stick is. Well, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this one too. Well, I don't say enjoy it, because it's not something to enjoy. It's something as an eye-opener. There's no other way to look at this except to open your eyes, open the windows of your mind to understand what's going on. A lot of what politicians have been telling us is not necessarily the truth. What the press has been telling us is not necessarily the truth. Incidentally, all that happened in Jammu and Kashmir, 89, 90, 91, the press was totally silent. Believe me, the silence is deafening. There was not a word in the papers, not a word in all the news channels. Why? Something to think about very carefully. Was the leadership at that time up to the mark? Should we ever trust them again? Whether it's in Jammu and Kashmir, Karnataka, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, anywhere. If the leadership is not up to the mark, they may have been elected for 5 years, call them back within 1.5 years. Make them behave or else. Thanks for watching, folks. If you like, please subscribe, please pass on to all your friends, your groups, and ask them to pass it on as well. Because this is something which all of us should understand in this whole country, not just in little bits. Thanks. Good night. Bye, sir, folks.